Greetings. Greetings. Part two. Conversation with Tony Mobley today is May 7th, 2025. 8 p.m. start time, a little bit late today, but we have a fantastic guest that's worth the wait. So today we have Dr. Graham Barrett. This is episode 17 of Conversation with Tony Mobley. This is the 17th episode of 2025. We are powered by Mimo Live, and we want to thank the team behind Conversation with Tony Mobley. We have a interactive chat called Mukana, where you can ask your questions, and your questions can be voted up and down. Not only can you ask your questions and they can be voted up and down, you can also participate by asking your question in the YouTube chat. So however you decide to ask your questions, this is a great opportunity to talk with a person who is an eye surgeon, but he decided that it was important enough to create a device so people can have excellent eye contact in their virtual meetings. And that is Dr. Graham Barrett. And he's with me today. And so we're going to get right into it. And the first question is, who is Dr. Graham Barrett? Dr. Barrett, thank you again so much for being here with me today. I am so happy to have you here. And apologies for our little hiccup in the beginning of the show.
Tony, well, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm looking forward to our conversation. And that's a great question to start off. Very broad question. Who is a person and how you see yourself, but I'll do my best and try and keep it quite short. So, I start off and I think of myself and I think of my family, my wife, 48 years, my 2 boys and my 3 grandchildren. But sometimes people are asking, well, what do you do? Which is a somewhat different question, but what I do is I'm an ophthalmologist, an eye surgeon, and that's been my profession and my only profession. That sounds pretty boring, but my life has other facets and other parallel pathways outside my profession, which maybe we can explore if you're interested. But
Absolutely.
yeah, when you're a medical specialist or a surgeon, it doesn't leave too much pathways, and you tend to stick to that profession because it takes you so long to get there, and the training is so long that you don't usually explore other professions. But fortunately, it's a profession which leaves lots of richness and changes and options as you go down that pathway. You may think that the eyeball being really all of 24 millimeters in diameter would be a strange organ to specialize in, but it's of course a very important functional organ, and it gives us our sight and our vision. And you may be surprised to know that we subspecialize, and so we have areas of the eye, and I'm focused mainly on the anterior segment. So this is just the front, maybe 4.5 millimeters of the eye. But that's the area where I've spent my life, and it's been a very fortunate life. It's an area of great change. The surgery's changed. Our understanding of vision has changed, and it's given me lots of opportunities to, I think, be a pathway for what to me is my core, and that is as someone who's a creative individual and likes exploring and solving issues and problems. And only later on in life do you realize that not everybody has that same urge, that same curiosity. But anyone who's done any sort of innovation will reflect and understand that's the core thing that drives them, that makes them, provides that satisfaction, which we all need from whatever we do. And that's been the case for me in ophthalmology.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We have a question from Mr. Ray Franklin of Mount Dora, Florida. Dr. Barrett, you are much sought after speaker at medical conferences. What goes into your preparation for success?
Well, obviously the content is what motivates and drives your career as far as being a sought after speaker and talking at conferences. But how we present is very much the individual craft. And I was always trying to present um, in the most elegant but clear fashion that I could. And for me, it became a outlet for my interest in video, interest in graphics. And so I ended up with quite an unusual style of not having individual slides on any of my presentation. So I may have 20, 40 slides recently in LA, but each one is a separate animation. I'm not sure how effective it is as a means of communication, but it's something that I enjoy. And so I have an unusual style of presentation. But end of the day, it's not really how you present it, but what you're telling people, which they really find of value. And the other ways we present, in some ways, just reflect our own uh, creative urges.
I'm curious to, are you using PowerPoint? Are you using possibly Keynote, or is there something else that you're using for your presentations?
So anybody who's involved with graphics would look at my presentation and understand because the PowerPoint is just the carrier for the animation. Each animation is prepared separately, and you need 3 or 4 programs. You need a 3D modeling program. You need a composition program, which I use After Effects. I use Cinema 4D for my 3D. You still need static, Photoshop type of images to combine. And then you have to create a format that you can um, use in PowerPoint, which today is MP4. It's been an interesting journey because PowerPoint's been quite primitive in earlier years, all sorts of different codecs, but it's quite stable now. But I get that question all the time. People who watch it say, well, what software did you use? But there's no one single software that does that. And so it's an extraordinary amount of effort. And I often question, well, is it worth all that time and effort? But as I said, I enjoy it.
I'm curious, are you looking at any AI possible support for doing what you do?
I just discovered it recently, Tony. And, when you have an idea, you don't really, you have a 20, 40 slide presentation. And as you sit and do one slide, the ideas and the metaphors spring forth from the first slide. So you don't really know exactly. So I can't say, create a presentation for me on a particular subject. But I'm finding the graphic side are very useful. So instead of having to maybe draw from scratch, I can talk to AI and say, create me an image of an ophthalmologist with a patient, and the patient's looking unhappy. And then I'll say, well, no, the patient's too young, and change it. So that ability I've really enjoyed in the last year or so, being able to get that reference image, which you then build on, and then you add on your own text and you add on your own animation, or you put in the 3D element. But having that ability in a short time has saved a lot of time.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Uh, um, as we I want to reach out to the audience again and say this is a fantastic opportunity for you to ask Dr. Barrett about his whole process of creating the IV, why he wanted to do that. And that's going to be our next question. So, why does an ophthalmologist, an eye surgeon, a person who has spent his career helping individuals with their health of their eye, create a device called the iVi, which is a video production um, device that allows people to look directly into the camera, make fantastic eye contact, and it also has. And let's talk about the features that it has. But before, why did you create this device?
Good question, Tony. Most things that you create stem from solving problems. And the problem we all faced a few years ago was COVID. And so instead of traveling several times a year to different meetings, my life suddenly came to a halt in that I couldn't travel. Australia responded to COVID by essentially um, curtailing all travel. West Australia, where I live, decided to cut itself off from the rest of Australia. So you couldn't come into Western Australia from the other states for almost 3 years. And we lived in this isolated bubble. We never had COVID. And so we had no restrictions at all. And we literally, but we were totally isolated. So there was no idea of being able to travel again. So my whole life, like many of us, became online. And you mentioned, Tony, your own journey of discovering office hours and another world. And by necessity, I had to do the same. So suddenly I discovered Zoom or Teams, and I was horrified how bad it was. Every element was
I
bad.
apologize for laughing because that's kind of the way I feel about it as well. But please continue.
Yeah. So I set about fixing it, and I'm sure you've done the same. You end up fixing your audio with a decent mic. I'm not using that, but I have it, and I have a little Rode Procaster sound disc, and I've got Elgato lights, and I've got an APC, a Canon camera on a tripod, and it was certainly making the video look much more presentable and made the audio sound better. But there were two things that were wrong. The most important one is my eye contact was so poor. And because I may be talking one to one, but I may be talking one to 1,000, I felt really compromised that I wasn't looking at them when I was talking to them. And if you're trying to communicate with anyone or with a group of people, we communicate by looking at each other. And especially if you're imparting the message, so one to many, I think you do need that eye contact. And it just wasn't there. And so I found a solution. I don't come from a broadcast background at all, so I kind of rediscovered the principles of a teleprompter. And this is familiar today because there are devices based on that principle, but this is going back to 2020. And I worked out that with um, a screen display and a teleprompter, and using the communication software, I could restore eye contact. And with enthusiasm, I started building some of these devices. So at the same time, when COVID happened, I had shut down for 3 weeks. So I managed to get my CNC router installed. And the first project I did and built was this device. And, uh, like many things we do, some things you do, and you say, well, gee, this is really good. So I made a couple. And a good friend of my son who went to med school with him had diverted his med school, went to Stanford in the MBA, Michael Winlow, and he immediately got it. His life also was online, and I built one for him. And then we decided in our naivety that, yes, well, we need to make this for other people as well. And that began a 4 or 5 year journey of industrial design, um, electronic design, uh, understanding business to some extent, marketing in what you see today, which is iVi. But the other thing that makes iVi what it is today, the other drawback of solving the problem in bits and pieces was my room became a nightmare. I had cables, I had many devices plugged in. Even to start a conversation was a hit and miss. Took a while to set up, and my small study became almost unusable. So not only did I want to restore eye contact, but I wanted to make sure that the video component was part of the same system. I wanted to make sure that the audio, both the speakers and the microphone, were also integrated into the device. And the last thing was some illumination for lighting. So this is the reason why iVi is what it is today. And the other reason it is what it is I made this for me, basically. So there's no compromise, Tony, in the video, in the audio, in the microphones. And it had to look elegant. I didn't want the tripods and so on. And I wanted to be able to sit on the desk, take up a small desk space. It give you all the functionality that I'm sure you and probably everyone watching has solved in their own way, but perhaps not in such a integrated video interface. That's the reason for the name. And that's a short summary of how iVi came about. Tony, a longer
That's
journey than
great.
I anticipated.
That, thank you so much for that. And as you were talking about it, and I was thinking, I kind of wish, I'm looking into a teleprompter, but I have the microphone over here. I have lights over there, and I got five, five different monitors that I'm looking at, and I have to work hard to
Yes.
make sure that I'm looking at the prompter because I have so many other things that are here. And I think a mutual friend, Ray Franklin, um, got on me in the early days about the importance of eye contact, and he he was giving me very good support at the beginning of Conversation with Tony Mobley because I wasn't used to. I'm used to speaking, but I'm used to speaking in environments in com- community places, houses of worship, and things like that, where the eye contact is a totally different thing than it is when you are using video. And so I thank you for your invention, and I thank you for creating it. And I'm going to share the iVi link, and this is the iVi Meet the iVi, and it says virtual just got personal, and it's a sleek design. Congratulations, sir, on that. And yes, I'm on the web page, and I'm going to share a few more things with you. Look great, sound fantastic. Okay, and we have a question from Clylock Lopez Waterman, and his question is: Did you have a history of building things before the iVi?
Um, I've been a hobbyist all my life, and that includes electronics, it includes woodwork, it includes anything that springs into my mind, I like to make. I mean, there's a special magazine called Make Magazine dedicated to people like myself. So I had that background, 3D printing, machining, and I don't think I could have done iVi without it. Not that I'm physically making it, but to be able to interact, number one, with the industrial designers and actually take on that role largely as the project progressed, talk intelligently to the factory and help solve some of the problems which always arise with circuitry. Um, that really helped me tremendously. And even with the website and so on, to have some basic skills in 3D modeling and feeling for aesthetics. Um, Life takes you along pathways, and sometimes you think, well, did you go along that pathway because you had those other interests, or is fate just got you in the right place to be able to travel that because of those other little interests and skills that you pick up along the way? Interesting thought.
Yes, it is interesting, you know, the fact that you have all of this hobbyish, I want to say, support, and then you were able to, a need came, and because of all of the other things that you were able to draw from, you were able to create the iVi. So it's an amazing. Um, I don't have one, but I know that you're using one. And I
Yes.
know that Dr. Iddleston, who is a part of our panel today, he's being very quiet. Um, he has one, and I know Ray Franklin has one. Um, and I've heard nothing but praise from everyone that I know is using it. So, congratulations to you, sir, for creating this device. And I just want to emphasize, I think that the idea of interacting with people in a virtual meeting and you're not making good eye contact is a definite no-no. And so I encourage um, anyone who is listening to go to the website, take a look at it, and see if it'll work for you. Um, Again, I want to thank you so much. I know that you um, were traveling and you kind of made a sacrifice. Well, not kind of, you made a sacrifice to be on the show with me today. So I want to say again, thank you so much for being here. And and we are thankful that you made that sacrifice. And I'm going to pause for just a minute to bring in Dr. Iddleson for if he'll come in for just a quick second. And and the
Glad,
reason that I
glad to
want
be
Dr.
here.
Iddleson to come in, the reason I want you to come in is because Dr. Barrett is very modest, and I just wanted you to just share some of his accomplishments so that our audience understands very clearly that it's not just happenstance that he created the iVi. And so, would you just share your thoughts on some of the things that Dr. Barrett has done? Because he is a modest person, I can tell that by our conversation. But I think it's important for some of us to hear some of his accolades.
Well, I'm going to let Graham talk about some of the things that he's done, but I can tell you that personally how we got involved. And it's interesting. COVID hit, um, and we all know the impact that that had. But prior to COVID, I was working with our California state parks, and one of the biggest challenge they had was getting people to look into a camera and make eye contact. Zoom had a challenge, have people turn on their cameras even pre-COVID. when COVID hit, it became a real problem to be able to get good interaction, get that human contact. And as Graham mentioned, Perth is pretty far away anyway, but it was pretty isolated once it was shut down, just as we were isolated here in Monterey. But that's when I first met Graham, again, through it's good to have family. My daughter had gone to school with now Graham's partner in the iVi project, and they had this device. And when travel opened up, they were able to bring it to the United States and start showing it around. And so I instantly was interested in it because I've spent a long time looking at various ways of helping people get better eye contact and have a better presence in either video production, but even in Zoom calls. And teleprompters aren't new, but teleprompters were designed to have professional talent read a script off a piece of glass in front of a monitor, which is very different than setting up a system whose focus is making sure you're doing good eye contact. So I immediately saw the value in this. But I will say it took me a little while because I had teleprompters, so I had the iVi and teleprompters, and it really took me a while for me to say I'm going to switch totally to the iVi because I was used to some of the other setups very much like you have, Tony. But I realized that I am different when I'm talking through this device, and it's because it's not only just the design of the device, the design of the camera and the lenses, and the audio system that you really feel you're in the same room. But probably to me, the bigger connection was I also found out I needed cataract surgery. And we're talking iVi. I said, well, not knowing much about Graham other than that he had this incredible device, I said, I've got this cataract surgery and I have this little extra problem that they're telling me about. Any advice? And I realized this was sort of like going to Einstein, Albert Einstein. He said, can you tell me a little about relativity? So, Graham, your opening statement of who you are was very modest. You were really instrumental in helping develop what is modern eye surgery for the cataract. And can you talk a little bit about that journey?
Thanks, John. I can talk a bit about the journey. I think it stems from the same issue. When I see things, I see the limitations in them and I set about solving them. I also had that same approach to ophthalmology. So even as a young trainee, I was still in my training, I decided that the implants that were being used weren't as good as they could be. And for some reason, I thought, even though I was on the outskirts of civilization, well, I could change that. And not having enough sense to be daunted, I set about doing that. And that culminated in the world's first foldable intraocular lens. That was in 1983. That's all the type of lenses that you get today. But that didn't stop there because I got involved in the surgery, the machines, fluidics, fluid dynamics, instruments. But for all those things which really I was fascinated and deeply involved in, the one which I probably am most well known for wasn't as sexy as some of those other things, but it was just planning the surgery. How do you choose the power of the lens that you implant for each and every patient? And I developed a formula for that, which is now, I would say, very widely used. And if you ask anyone in the profession about my name, they have forgotten about the first implant, they've forgotten about the machines, but the planning, the thing which I probably didn't put the most effort into, is the thing that probably endures most today. But
well, Graham, the cataract surgery that's the most prevalent surgery in the world right now.
Look, it is, but the beauty of it is beyond the prevalence. Lots of surgery leaves you. It may be a success, but you're often somewhat less than you were before. You function less. You've lost unfortunately part of your body. But cataract surgery is not just the most common, but probably the most successful and the greatest benefit because it leaves you better off than you were beforehand. And that reward that you get is amazing, and I never take that for granted. So it's a beautiful surgery. It's done enough that people kind of take it for granted and say, oh, it's just cataract surgery. It's the most exquisite operation. It's microsurgery. Um, you're deeply immersed for that 15, 20 minutes, deeply immersed in what you're doing. And yeah, it's just, I'm grateful I made that choice to go down that stream. Once again, fate takes you down interesting pathways.
Well, in the
And,
faith of this meeting, it was funny because when I was talking to my surgeon and he was trying to explain what he's going to do, and I said, "Well, I know a little bit about this." And then they said, "Well, do you need any more information?" I said, "No, I have a friend who's a surgeon, and he told me about it." He said, "Well, I might know him." I said, "Well, I'm not sure. He's from Perth." Again, not knowing how well known you were. And when I said your name, even the technician there said, "His formula is how we're doing your your lenses," and handed me the printout from the Zeiss device. And I
oh,
guess that was
wow.
sort of a pretty mathematical art and science because my understanding is there were a number of different formulas that doctors had to choose between. And you came up with something that where my surgeon said was magic. What used to be a complicated process really became much easier.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it proved to be more effective, more predictable than the existing formulae at the time. Um, but it was done for myself. I was doing my own calculations, and I wanted to do a bit better. So the motive is the same. But the other motive for iVi, which I sometimes forget about, is that not only did I want to create something superior and functional and beautiful, but I wanted everybody to access that better communication because besides those of us that are involved with tech, who are undaunted by the additional equipment, the tripods, the speakers, microphones, that's beyond the average person. Those people, those of us that are interested in tech, don't realize there's another 90% of the population that's reluctant to plug anything in, and their understanding of tech and their um, not just ability, but their interest would preclude them doing the same type of additional uh, devices, etc., that we use as an alternative to iVi. It's beyond them. So it had to be a one cable connect turnkey, sort of plug and play type of device as well. If you want to bring that better communication and that eye contact and that video and audio, you really have to make it a straightforward process. And that's one of the reasons why iVi doesn't have a plug-in camera on the back, because that would
Gentlemen,
require you choosing a
I, I'm gonna
camera.
I'm going to interrupt you just for a quick second because we have an IV question that I think that you will like, Dr. Barrett. Claddock Lopez Waterman, Ohio, USA. I have recently had an eye exam where the doctor was remote. I can report they could have used an IV. Has that been a market for it?
Uh, Great question. Thank you for the question. Immediately, we identified that this was a market that desperately needed it because you're imparting information. Sometimes you're giving advice. You may even be counseling somebody. And if you're not looking at them, you've lost that really vital component. It's an interesting market, though, Tony, because it needs it desperately. But the whole um, telehealth and the ability to add additional cost, the enthusiasm for telehealth providers to provide that extra, I think, vital component is something that we're still working on. There are barriers which you wouldn't think would exist, but they are. And
How do we
so,
get the
I mean,
word out? How do we get the word out? Because as this question was, as I was reading this question, I'm really, why
yes,
would a doctor who is in this day and age doing remote work, why would they not want to have a device like this?
that's a good question. We're still trying to understand why the uptake isn't more enthusiastic than one would think. Part of it is the experience of iVi is something that you really don't really understand until you use it, Tony. It's immersive and it's almost a different level of communication. But you can see the website, you can read about it, you can hear about it, but it often takes using it to really understand viscerally how different it is what you do day to day. The concept makes sense, but the reality of using it is often what it takes. So we have to try and understand that somehow we need to enable that, the ability to show people and demo it, at least in an online conversation, but possibly even sitting on your desk. And John, I think you found that yourself, that you
Yeah.
intellectually understood it. You've had similar type of equipment, but the experience is somewhat different.
Yeah, it was interesting. And when you started today, you talked about your specialty of the eye, but also that there's even the front of the eye versus the back of the eye, the retina, I guess, if I'm doing it right. And even when I had my surgery, I had some complications. And so my surgeon said, well, I work on the front of the house. This guy's going to help you on the back. But so I didn't really quite realize the subtleties of a teleprompter. I sort of thought, well, a teleprompter is a teleprompter, and I had multiple ones, and I would use them on different systems because I'd be testing them out for people that I'd be the park rangers I'm working with. And then I said, yeah, there really is something different. The speakers on this were great, and they were essentially the distance apart of my ears. And I had it set up on the table in our dining room, and I was in a Zoom call, and my wife said, "Who's here?" And I said, "What do you mean, who's here?" So, somebody come in? I said, "No, this is on Zoom." And she realized that the clarity of the audio and the fact that I've been intensely talking, she had no idea that I was on a video conference. And I think that's what I learned.
Wow.
And Tony,
Wow.
you
That's
work with a
that's amazing.
teleprompter, and my son was using a teleprompter, and even with a teleprompter, usually the screen's too large. You're looking at different places. So the iVi really psychologically, I don't have to do anything different than if I were sitting across the table. And that's the thing that I learned with consistent use in my meetings and Zoom calls.
Well, Dr. Barrett, what's next?
What's next? Well, the big next is taking the product is very polished now and very robust, but I'm beginning to understand the business side of marketing and exhibitions and so on is quite an interesting road to travel. So that's next. But Ivy will work out the box perfectly for 90% of the situations, but sometimes you experience bad lighting. You have a bright window, and that can really offset, even with the inbuilt lighting, and you need additional lighting. Now, as I said, I've got two Elgato things on my desk. Um, you may have something similar, Tony, and I don't like, I shouldn't say them because I'm not targeting Elgato. Any of the solutions out there for lighting, I didn't find quite what I wanted, which was a similar thing, a small footprint, easy ability to place on your desk without clamping things on your desk. So it's on my desk because that's what I'm working on. You can see this. So I'm heavily involved, despite the disapproval of some of my team, because they say first you've got to make a success of the main device. But this is a matching um, um, accessory light that you can place, you know, remote to the side of iVi, a very soft light, and it's obviously very simple when compared to the iVi device, which is super sophisticated, but still totally absorbed. Beginning some tooling, doing the circuitry myself here in Perth, and for the moment that's next. But Tony, once you enter the space of making virtual meetings and also desktop production, because that's the other use of iVi. One is one-to-one and one-to-many conversations. The other is one-to-one recordings, a mini desktop studio. Once you enter that world and you say, well, I want to make this area better, there's many different things. And so I've got a list of things, but this is the next one. So that's very current, Tony. Not quite
Well,
ready,
sir,
but be soon. Yes.
fantastic. Thank you, sir, so much for being here with me today. Our last question is, you're speaking to the world. What do you want the world to know?
Look, I want the world to know that if I can make this successful, that will be the reward, because I think it will bring something additional to many different activities, Tony. And for each individual, that activity is the most important to him. And if it can do that, and if it can just lift the level of what's part of our lives now, which is being online and talking to people, restore some of that real humanity of talking directly to someone and communicating effectively, that will be my satisfaction.
Okay. If people have additional questions, how might they reach you?
Look, there's a variety of ways. One is via, we have an iVi team in the US, and they would definitely pass it on. But they can communicate with me directly. I'm happy. Maybe afterwards, I'll give you my email number and happy to, answer any questions anyone would have. But as I said, there is an iVi team, and that's another pathway. And sometimes they'll be more effective in answering that question. But if they have any personal questions or would like to talk to me directly, of course, I'm open to them emailing me directly.
Thank you, sir, so much. Thank you, Dr. Barrett. Thank you, Dr. Idelson, so much for being with me today. Conversation with Tony Mobley is produced by valued audiovisual professionals who meet daily on Office Hours Global, hosted by Alex Lindsay. Thank you, Mimo Live. This conversation was powered by Mimo Live. We have conversations with real people, and we thank everyone for being a part of over 100+ episodes of Conversation with Tony Mobley. And when you have time, we ask that you go back and look at some of those additional conversations, and hopefully you will find something that will be helpful to you. Next week, we're going to have a conversation with Mr. Ken Jordan. Mr. Ken Jordan, the creator of AI Tony Mobley, AI Liberty White. And so he's going to be talking about the process he has of creating AI individuals. And we ask that you tune in next week for that conversation with Ken Jordan. And we want to thank you all so much again for being a part of this conversation today. We ask that you take care. God bless. See you soon. Bye bye.